This is Fam Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Jody Maberry. Welcome to the Fam Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing today?
Oh, I'm wonderful. It's great to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you on the show. We like to talk to people from around the world, and you're a podcaster as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. I've been podcasting for 10 years now.
Oh, wow. I started in 2016, so I've been out there a little bit.
Yeah, you have.
And so a couple questions we'll get into before the heart of your story. I ask every guest is like what motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Well, I think we'll get deeper into this, I'm sure later. But one of the things that motivates me, can I tell you two sides of it? There's two
Yeah.
stories that come together in the middle. All right, so one of the sides is my business partner and we were in Nashville. So Lee Cockrell's my business partner. He ran Walt Disney World for a decade, was the executive vice president. And we're in Nashville, and he had just given a presentation, and someone came up to him and said, "Nobody ever told me it could be this way." And he said, What do you mean?" And the gentleman said, "I've worked here all these years, and no one told me how I'm responsible, how leadership is up to me, how I can make a difference." And hearing him say that made me think, gosh, well, what I do helping Lee Cockrell get his message out there, it's impacting people I don't even know, that I didn't realize I would meet. So that's one side. The other is there was another executive vice president of Disney asked Lee Cockrell for an introduction to me. And when I finally got to meet him, Ron Logan was his name. He said, "I had a great career at Disney, and now I want to create something that will almost be like my legacy work to help people learn what I know, even when I'm not here anymore." And I realized that I'm in a perfect position to put that gentleman that was on the front line in Nashville together with people that have big messages like Ron Logan, and help bring it all together. And that just excites me. It motivates me to get up every day and help make that happen.
That's interesting. That encounter got you on the path.
Yeah, that's part of it. So I started my first podcast in 2014, and it is I still have the show going. It's the Park Leaders Show. It's a show for leaders in parks and conservation. And at one point, I wanted to talk to someone from Disney about what natural parks can learn from themed parks. And I
Oh,
didn't,
that's
yeah, I didn't have a connection at Disney. Now, you may not, at first, if you've been to Disney and you've been to Yellowstone, you may not think they have anything in common, but it's fascinating how much they do have in common. But I didn't have a connection at Disney. I found the book Creating Magic on Amazon, written by Lee Cockrell, retired executive vice president of Walt Disney World. And I reached out to him thinking there's no way that this guy who ran Walt Disney World is going to come on this little podcast for park rangers. But what I didn't know, Lee's sister-in-law had been a park ranger for 30 years at that time. And she retired as the superintendent of Glacier Bay National Park in Alaska. So I reached out, said, "Will you come on my show for park rangers?" He said, "Oh, absolutely. I love park rangers." So that's for me, that's where what I do now started. Lee came on the show. It went really good. I said, "Will you come back and talk about your second book, which was The Customer Rules?" He came back to talk about a second book, and then we ended up teaming up to do a show together, which is creating Disney Magic podcast. We started that in 2014. There's 540 some episodes of that, and that's been quite a story on its own. So that's actually where it came from. And then Lee and I started doing more events together, more work together. And then as I learned how to help him create content, get his message out, that allowed me to help others create their content, get their message out.
That's interesting because like you found a synergy that you didn't even know was there, you know. But sometimes you
Yeah.
just have to go and ask because some people are so like timid or afraid of the negative response that they don't try. And a
Yeah.
lot of times you can find that if you go after people, you can actually get them. You know, you can get somebody to show up and you didn't think you could do it, and then you do.
Yeah, that's right. That's if I could have said no for Lee Cockrell and then it was over. I wouldn't have even reached out to him. But if you don't say no for other people, you some pretty fun things can end up happening.
Yeah, as I've always been very expansive because I didn't have a narrow focus with this show. You know, the show I'm doing now,
Mhm.
it initially was only talking to singer-songwriters, and then I said, "Well, you know, everybody's creative, so why don't I talk to film directors and talk to authors?" And then say, "Well, you know, CEOs are creative,
Yeah.
therapists are creative, like, everybody's creative. So why don't I have a very wide space to just talk to
Mhm.
anybody that's interesting and creative in any space?" And so that's, you know, people say, "Oh, you shouldn't do that. You should have just a niche." But it's worked for me. Maybe it wouldn't work for other people because of the way they operate. But I think like you have to be willing to kind of see like, hey, where could I go? You know?
Yeah, and you touched on something important there that if I tried to copy you, it might not work. If you tried to copy me, it might not work. It it's what works for you because you have different experiences, different personality. So it's podcasting is wonderful and I endorse anybody having a podcast, but to start a show and just copy Phantom Electric Ghost from the beginning is just not going to work.
Well, yeah, I always feel like when I deal with musicians, I'm a musician, right? So I'm a producer and I'm a software guy. I got three hats. I do software as my day job. My passion is music as a producer and musician, and then I like podcasting, and I've been doing it pretty heavy. And what I find is, you know, with if you deal with musicians, sometimes they want to clone what's really popular, like especially
Mhm.
make a younger artist. And I've always said, you know, I want to see the demo that you're scared to show me
Oh,
because I want to
interesting.
hear who you really are, not who you're trying to be. Like you're trying to be Taylor Swift or you're trying to be Billy Joel, you're trying to be whatever. You're trying to be somebody else, but it's like, who are you? I want to hear who you are and then help you actually make that better. Because that's the job of a producer is actually bring that out. And you know, some producers might want to just make you sound like them. And there are producers that do
Mhm.
that. They have a signature style and you sign up with them to get that. And other producers actually want to build you up and make you the secret sauce. And I've always been about making this somebody their
Yeah,
own secret sauce.
how fascinating. As I hear you tell that story, what I'm hearing, what I'm thinking is what they're putting out is what they think people will accept. And what they're scared to show you, that's more in line with who they really are, what they really want to do. And you help bring that out. I love it.
I think that's the key because like what the world doesn't need people just doing copycat. You know, it can work. You know, people do you see a cat video, you make another cat video because you like the cat video, you mimic it.
Yeah.
But like what to me is like, what if you went out there and said something really profound that nobody else said instead of doing the cat video with the same song that everybody's using in the same angles and the same camera and same kind of thing? It's like, whoa, we've seen that before, and the
Yeah.
algorithm likes things it's seen before.
Mhm.
But I'd rather go to the newfound thing or what we call the newfound sound, right? Is
Oh,
not a
I
sound
like
that's
it.
already out there. It's something that you know ends up being like Coltrane or Davis or Hendrix or something that you hadn't heard before.
Yeah, that's great. I like it.
So you work with a lot of different people other than Disney. You work with Morgan James Publishing, Great Escape Publishing, and other big brands. So, like, how did you kind of move from like park ranger and talking to Disney into these kind of brand and you know spaces? How did you pivot?
Well, it's pretty interesting. I used to be a park ranger, and when I went from that's why I do the park leader show because when I left parks, I went back to school and got an MBA, and when I finished that, I thought I just want to be involved in parks, but I don't want to be a park ranger again. So I started the park leader show, everything that has come since happened because of that podcast. So at the time, I was a marketing director at a luxury home builder, and I left them and started working on my own doing marketing. And they were my first client. So the company I left, they just hired me as a contractor, and we worked together for 6 more years. Great relationship, but it allowed me to move on and do other things. So that's what I was moving towards, doing marketing for architects, home builders, contractors. And I started that show, the Park Leader Show, which then connected me to Lee Cockrell. We started creating Disney Magic. When you work with someone like Lee Cockrell, people start to reach out to you and say, can you do for me what you're doing for him? So that led to another podcast and then another podcast. And before I knew it, I was hosting 4 or 5. And I said, oh, well, people seem to like what I'm doing. So let me see how many I can get going. And then I reached out to people I had met before at conferences. That led to doing the podcast for Morgan James Publishing. That led to the podcast for Great Escape Publishing. And at my peak, I was at 10 shows at the same time.
Oh, wow.
I've done so many podcasts that I counted just a couple of weeks ago, and I've done more than 2,600 episodes now.
Wow.
And that all came from the podcast. And I've always used podcasts as a foot in the door. Once we're doing a podcast together, that's going to lead to some other stuff. And that's really how it worked for me.
It's like well, it's kind of like you're at that meeting and you get that connection, and that's your Rolodex, and then it's your real lead, like sales lead. A lot of times or like in music, like we meet somebody, and then you end up like, oh, I'm going to go on your tour. I'm going to play bass with your band, or I'm going to come and sit on your session and do some work with you. And like, just because you're hanging with somebody, it's like, hey, it's an opportunity. You work with somebody and suddenly, oh, you could end up doing a video game soundtrack because you talk to a game producer, and then you talk to an indie film producer, and suddenly they get into your stuff, and you're talking about something else, and they say, oh, you do this, and then suddenly you get this other thing. And in the podcasting, because you talk to so many different people, you get a lot of leads, and even if you weren't looking for it, these opportunities kind of land in your lap.
Yeah, it's true. You're right on. Meet a lot of people. Don't say no for them. Just see what's out there. And my goodness, things happen.
Yeah. I mean, because sometimes people are so like proactively looking for it, and then they don't hit it, and they're wondering what happens. But what if you create this space where you can just communicate, right, in a very freeing way, like this open-ended discussion, and it gets people comfortable. I get a lot of people, these artist managers come in for authors, and then I get tons of authors from their agents, from other authors talking to other authors, and they got the film directors talking to other film directors, and you get these opportunities, and the people just come to you out of nowhere, and you weren't even looking for it. And once you've been doing something since you were 2014, I'm at 2016 out there in this space, and these people just keep on coming back. I've had multiple bands come back to do 3, 4 interviews every time they have an album. They come back and they talk. I had an artist last night, and they had a brand new album coming out on the 21st, and they came out and previewed some of the songs on the show because I talked to them 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I talked to one of their members in another band, and talked to that band a year before that. So you get these opportunities to just kind of propagate.
Yeah. And that's something very special about a podcast. If you didn't have a podcast, those bands probably wouldn't call you and say, hey, can I play 3 songs for you? Can we talk about the new album? But when you have a podcast, my goodness, it's you can have conversations with people that normally would never have the time to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you end up. I mean, I don't even go through an agent with some of these bands anymore. They come to me directly, like a member, or the bass player, or the drummer will come right to me with no agent, and that's the kind of relationship you kind of want. Like you can actually go right to the source you're not going through the middle person. And to me, that's in podcasting. I was so surprised that I've gotten to like Award winning producers and talked to them directly, got on a FaceTime, got on a Zoom call, and I'm not going through their agent. I'm like, wow, how did that happen?
That's
And you're
great.
like, it just happens. Like you met the guy, from Disney and you're talking to him and, maybe you didn't have to go through a lawyer or something. Like sometimes you can't get to certain people without going through all these steps. They've got like layers. And then sometimes like I found in this space that you can cut through the layers and get right to people. And I'm like, I never imagined that, but I've experienced that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great thing. Once you do good with a podcast, it opens so many doors just for conversations, and conversations often lead to opportunities and good things happen.
Yeah, because it's like people feel that it's authentic. Unlike,
Mhm.
like an infomercial or like an advertisement that you film or a segment that you do on a kind of the existing legacy media, they might have a 15-minute segment or 5-minute segment or 3-minute segment, but these podcasts are like they can go 30 minutes, they can go hour, they can go 2 hours. And so you get out there and you have these like really different type of discussions that don't seem forced, they don't seem fake. People tend to gravitate to things they think are real or
Yeah.
that seem authentic, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that's why podcasting works so well. And it touches on what we said earlier. If you're doing your own show, your own way, people connect with that. And you may not end up with a large audience, but you'll end up with an audience that appreciates you for what you do, for who you are, for your personality, the way you talk, the questions you ask, all of that. And I even tell people, start a podcast even if no one except your mother listens to it. And the reason why, I've found something really special happens when you have to show up every day with something to say, or every week. If you have a
Mhm.
weekly show and you have to show up with something to say, or if it's an interview show and you have to show up every week and have a good conversation, you end up better at being curious. You end up better at talking with people and
Oh,
getting
yeah.
good stories out. And then if you have a monologue based show where it's just you and you have to have something to say every week, you start to understand what you believe. You start to understand how to talk about it. You understand what connects with people. I've had stories that I told on a podcast that to me was just a story I told that didn't mean anything. It was just to get to one spot, and it just really connected. And I've
Yeah,
turned that
yeah, it
into more.
resonates. Well, that's the thing is that you don't realize what resonates, and until you put it out in the world, and then
Yeah.
people come back to you and they say, "Hey, this really resonating." You're like, "Wow, I didn't realize that meant as much as it does." And
Yeah.
artists run into this all the time when we write songs. It's like we write something and when people come back and give us the feedback, and then how they perceive what we wrote may not be where we were coming from when we wrote it. And then
Yeah.
we're like, "Wow." And I've talked to tons of artists, they're like, "Wow, I didn't really see that people would actually hear it that way, but I appreciate it." That like, it opens your eyes, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And there are times where something is a hit that you've probably experienced this as a podcaster and a music producer. You have something you don't think will be a hit and it takes off. And you have something that you thought, I nailed this, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
nothing.
Doesn't go
I,
anywhere.
I've got a good example of a hit that just I never thought it would be. Many years ago, I did an episode of the Jody Maberry show about outgoing my outgoing message on my voicemail. So if you called my phone, the message you would hear, because I I I know the value of a good first impression. So if you called me and I didn't have the chance to make an impression on you, I want my voicemail to do it for me.
Wow, yeah.
So I did a podcast episode about that, and I thought, who's really going
Really
to
care
care?
about that.
It's an episode about voicemail. I have been shocked. It has probably been of I've have 300 and some episodes of the Jody Maberry show, and of all of them, that may be the one with the most feedback.
Most feedback.
People Yeah, people would even email me and say, I changed my voicemail because of you, because of that episode. And if they left their number, I would call and listen to it and then leave them a message. It was so much fun, but it was an episode that I thought nobody's going to care. And it has gotten so much feedback. And I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I have had episodes where I thought, oh, this is going to be my biggest episode ever. And you barely hear anything about it. So you
You
just
never
never
know.
know.
That's why you
Never
kind of
know.
throw it at the wall, and that's like you said, it's like showing up. It's like what I felt like with this show. I bet I've done like almost 1,200 episodes since 2016,
Oh, that's
and
wonderful.
I doing like 3 episodes tonight, and I do it live, and people are like, "Oh, how could you do something live?" And being a musician, the way I explain it is like I can play like a studio musician, something that's given to me,
Hmm.
right? I could just read the chart and do it. But I really enjoy going out and playing like modal fusion jazz and stuff that's more improvisational because you trust yourself and you get out there and you just kind of like yeah, after a while you get good at it. You do 10,000 hours, you do 1,200 episodes, eventually you get comfortable and you trust your judgment on how you're going to operate. And so I being live is not a big deal.
Mm.
The
Yeah.
the stress of it or the being like anxious about it, I'm not there. Right. I'm in this place where I enjoy it. I wouldn't do it if I didn't enjoy it. But the idea, like once you get that kind of muscle memory, then it
Yeah.
becomes just like it's not hard to do. So, so how could you do 3 episodes a night? Well, if it feels like breathing, it does. It's not hard. It's not work.
Yeah, that's right. That's wonderful. It's such a good spot to be, and it's the repetition. It's just doing it. And I used to say, and well, I still do that because of podcasting. With zero notice, you can put me on stage and I can talk for 30 minutes. No big deal. And it used to just be something I said. And then I actually got tested on it. I was helping at a conference. Someone was having a conference and they had coaches at the conference. And I was the head coach, like oversee the coaching group.
Hmm.
Well, somebody got sick
Oh,
and
you had
they
to
said,
replace
hey,
them.
can you give a 30-minute presentation? And I said, you bet I can. And it's the thing I always said I could do. And then I actually had to
And
do
you
it.
had
And
to,
all I wrote 7 words down on a piece of paper, and they had a confidence monitor, that would show your slides, but I didn't have slides
yeah,
because
you just wing
I
it.
found
Wing it.
out right before. So it was just 7 words. And I just wanted to see those words. And my whole presentation was those 7 words. And I never could have done that without the experience of podcasting.
Yeah, well, it's like that muscle memory. It's like the 10,000 hours. You're an athlete
Mhm.
getting a 3-point shot, musician learning the bass or a piano. Then you would say, oh, they don't have to look at their instrument because they can feel it. They know it, right? It's like your voice is an instrument. So once you've been a public speaker or you're a singer or an actor, you've been doing it, you did the 10,000 hours, you did more. Then you get into that space where there's like that muscle memory, and it's
Yeah.
not a hard thing to kind of riff, to be in the present moment. Because I think a lot of people get anxious because they're thinking about the past, they're thinking about the future, and they don't live in the present. The one thing that I think when we're in this space that I think any artist would get to, and I think we're creative people, we're artists, is like once you're in this space, you know what to do,
Mhm.
and once you own it and you trust yourself, you're not gonna have to go. Oh, let's do take 4. Let's do go back to 1, back to the top. You can do it.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm sure you felt it as a musician and a podcaster. My goodness, just put me in front of a microphone and I'm ready because it just becomes so comfortable. I would rather have a microphone in front of me, either here talking to you or on a stage in front of 50, 100 people, than have to mingle at a cocktail party. I have no idea what to do there, but you put a microphone and I just feel so comfortable because, as you've said, doing it over and over and over, it feels. But maybe when I go to a cocktail party, I'll just carry a microphone unplugged and just carry it with me, and I'll talk it, and then I'll be comfortable in front of people.
Yeah, I think it's like that kind of being able to that icebreaker in your mind that you break that ceiling of what you can't do once you start doing it. And it was interesting, before I was a podcaster, in order to get gear, I Ubered on the side. And what I found is, like, in order to get a good rating on Uber, you had to actually get like a good rating from your customer, which means you couldn't be in the cab and not talk to them. So
Mhm.
you learned, and the better you had conversations with your passengers, the higher the rating you would get on the ride. So after 5 years of doing that, that kind of you kind of like a taxi driver, therapist. 'Cause you're listening to people talking, bring them
Yeah.
to the airport, and people are telling you all this stuff. Over 5 years, people would start telling you really deep things. And I'm like, wow, that's interesting. So and then I said, what if I actually took some of that comfort I got from being able to talk to those people in the cab, and actually did that on the air with people, and
Yeah.
I was able to transfer what was going on in the cab to this space, and that whether or not you can see how you can relate something, but I found that, like, yeah, I was not the kind of person that would have been in front of people. Even as a musician, I'm a keyboardist. We're in the back
Mhm.
most of the time. Maybe you're not Billy Joe. Most of the time, you're just in the back playing.
Yeah.
you know, so that it's a different. It's weird that how that can happen. Like, you can transform yourself. That you wouldn't have thought you could do it, and then you end up doing it.
Mhm. Yeah, it's neat. What a cool story to go from Uber driver to podcaster. It's not that different. Not that different from knowing you have to maintain a conversation to get a good rating, probably get a good tip, get a good review, and then maintaining a conversation here. It's really not that different.
Yeah, but it comes automatic. It's like you're thinking initially, to get the good rating, but then it becomes like part of your life, that you
Yeah.
just naturally start to become a conversationalist. You start to learn how to read people, listening skills, like when you actually say something, when you don't, you know.
Yeah,
That's like
that's right.
the big thing.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, one downside though, I don't know if you felt this. One downside, I've had family members tell me, "Hey, look, I'm not on your podcast. Stop interviewing me."
Yeah, you gotta learn to turn it off. You gotta, like, your situational awareness is like, are you on the show? Or are you in
Yeah.
life? The actors, well, method actors can tell you about that. Yeah, like they can't get out of the character. And like I've
Yeah.
talked to actors, it's like, yeah, that's kind of difficult when you would spend all your time trying to get in the character, then to get
Mhm.
off scene, and it's like, then you can't get out of it. It's like,
Yeah, I've
it's
heard
hard.
that. Yeah. Have you done any acting?
No, well, the only acting you do as a musician is your stagecraft. When you're on stage, you kind of become this
Mhm.
other person. So that is somewhat theater. If you think about, like, David Bowie, like,
Yeah.
every time he was on stage, he was like playing a character, whether it was
Mhm.
Ziggy or the Thin White Duke, or Aladdin Sane. He would create these characters, and each one would always be different. And it's like, so he took like a lot of theater or acting kind of chops, and brought them to the stage. And if you actually check with a lot of musicians, they actually do that. They, when they're on stage, that they, Mick Jagger is like, if you talk to him, he's like a English businessman. If you
Mhm.
talk to him like one on one, he talks like some kind of business guy. He doesn't talk like a rocker. He doesn't strut like you would see him strutting. He was like, wow, it's like a dichotomy. It's like, this guy's has a stage self. He has his business self.
Yeah, I saw an interview with it was old, of Ozzy Osbourne, and he was saying, "Look, you wouldn't come to see John Osborne, but you would come to see Ozzy Osbourne, and they're two different. I'm John Osborne,
Yeah.
but it's Ozzy that you come to see." And I think to some degree, as podcasters, that's what we do as well, because hopefully you find me interesting as a podcaster. But what you wouldn't find interesting is the Jody Maberry that sits around on the couch on Wednesday and watches Survivor eating popcorn. Like, that's not very interesting. But this Jody Maberry, hopefully, is interesting. And it's the same, sure, but this one is a bit of a performance because it's me times two.
Yeah, it's like you have to have a certain stagecraft to be like a personality, to be out there in the ether.
That's
So
right.
if you're in the ether, like people don't want to see you. Like like I go and talk about like yes, you used to get criticized because they would turn their backs to the stage and just focus on the song. Like by the mid
Mm,
'70s, like, some of the progressive rockers were so into being like this master musicians that they didn't have any stagecraft. They would just be at the piano, not moving, turn their back to the audience. And like, people were like, that's how the punk movement, when they punk, like Clash showed up and the Ramones showed up, and they weren't like the musicians that the Yes was technically, but they had passion. They didn't have perfect pitch, but they had that authenticity. And
mhm.
maybe that was an act too, but they learned is like you need to maybe be that character, like Johnny Rotten. Maybe he's not really that. Well, on stage, he looked like he was the real punk. And Joe Strummer, when
Yeah.
he's on stage, he was the radical punk, like socialist. He was that on stage. I don't know if he was really that in real life, but that's what he carried out.
Yeah, I just read Cher's new biography, and she was talking about meeting Brian Williams from the Beach Boys
Hmm.
the first time she met him, and I forget exactly what she said, so I am not quoting Cher, but the spirit, the essence of what she said was how she was surprised because he was not a surfer, he was not a beach boy. It was
Yeah,
all a created persona.
it's all
And
image.
yeah. And I don't hear that and think, "Oh, what a fake." I think, "Oh, it's brilliant because he's a
And you can
performer."
carry it off. And like, well, if you're trying to have that aesthetic that we're all on the beach, and that's the
Yeah.
magic of like of creativity, that you get people to think you're in that zone. You know,
Yeah. Uh,
you get people to believe, like, Sun Ra, like, I don't know if you know, but there's a jazz they would say, "Oh, we're jazz musicians from outer space." Right? So they're out on stage and this like they're like these intergalactic getup, but they're playing like really intricate bebop, but they're dressed like these outer
mhm.
space people, but they was that was the get up to get people into it. But
Yeah.
the music was just as complicated as anything Coltrane or Davis or Monk was doing, right? But it's like they had this act, and some of the other jazz musicians were like, look down on them and say, "You're just supposed to wear a thin tie in the studio. You're not supposed to do that. What are you doing?" And they would be critical of their dress. It's like sometimes you have to have an act to get people into the mood, and there's some people that appeal to them. It's like they like that cosmic thing. It's like
Mhm.
the mothers of invention. People liked Zappa when he had that kind of happening thing going on. It was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, what's this thing going on? This weird happening. It's very strange. There's all these different people, on stage. So what's going on?" It's like, well, that drew people in. But then he's
Mhm.
like a serious musician, but he had all this kind of weird stuff going on that wasn't. Well, that's not about the music. Well, maybe it is.
Yeah. This is not something I normally would talk about as the guest on a show, but you've kind of led us there that my nickname is Sugar J. And when I am on a podcast, when I go on stage, when I do teach a workshop, that's always Sugar J. Jody Maberry's at home, but it's Sugar J that performs. And I don't refer to myself as Sugar J in front of people usually, unless I'm joking around, but I don't walk up on stage and introduce myself as Sugar J. But in my mind,
That's
that's
who
who
you
it
are.
is. It's the
Yeah.
persona going out there on stage. And and I heard recently I was listening to a podcast, they were talking about Bob Dylan.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And
He
they
has a lot
said
of images. Yes.
not only was Bob Dylan when he was on stage was he performing, but he was performing all the time.
Yeah.
Like
He was
he
like a
had
method actor.
yeah, he had created this character, Bob Dylan, and anytime he was in public, anytime he was telling stories, it was Bob Dylan the character, not the person.
And there's multiple versions. There's Nashville Skyline version. There's the version with the band. There's the version, like like the Tangled Up in Blue version. There's like the Arlo Guthrie, Woody Guthrie kind of
Mhm.
imitating version, and the nasal voice version. Like it's like people say, "Oh, he can't sing," but really, like listen to how he changes his voice for different projects and different periods. It's
Yeah.
not the same voice at all if you go through he has a voice range that you would think, well, he doesn't have a range. He actually does, and he has this whole persona that is equal to Ziggy Stardust. It's equal to Freddie Mercury, if you think about it, because
Mm.
that's not him. Like, that's
Yeah.
not the guy when he's at home. That's not who he is.
Yeah. Well, and it goes beyond music too, because Walt Disney, he was Walt Disney to people, and then he was just Walt at home. Walt Disney was a character. Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, same thing.
Yeah,
Mark
they were
Mark
known.
Twain was a character.
Yeah, really, he was highly known for that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's always that stage self or that other you that you would, talk about. Like Victorian poets even had this, like, the looking glass self. So there's like you're looking at yourself, and that's kind of like the inner self, and then there's this outer self that you present to the world,
Hmm.
and then that deeper self that you go into as an artist to kind of pull things out. And then you end up having all these selves, and some artists immediately you can see them calling on it and doing it in front of you. You can see it because you get like a guy like Prince, very extrovert on stage. On stage and off stage, he was not as extroverted as he appeared. He would
Yeah.
barely go outside of his Minnesota mansion. He would just be in there playing all day,
Hmm.
practicing all day. He wasn't like partying like he would seem like in his songs. He was just sitting there working all the time, like not partying, not going out. He had this image of like he's this extrovert, this and that. But it's like what he's really doing is just a musician at the piano all day playing.
Yeah, interesting. And I recently read Lisa Marie Presley's biography. She was working on it when she died, and then her daughter finished it. And in that, so she was married to Michael Jackson briefly, you may remember. And
Hmm.
in her book, she even said that the voice Michael Jackson used, that wasn't even his voice. That was
Yeah.
just Michael Jackson doing his character.
Yeah. But he had like a lot of different range to it. But yeah, a lot of these artists, they create this vocal character. And when people meet people, they get disappointed. I've read about fans being very disappointed, and even
Hmm.
like, groupies getting disappointed, thinking that the person that they heard on record was that person when they get to know him. And it's like, wow, this guy is not who I thought they were.
Yeah. All right. So that brings up an interesting question that is changing the topic. But given that you're a musician and you've probably heard a lot of live music, what is the best voice you have heard live?
Best, I like Greg Allman a lot. He's
Really?
not here anymore, but I would go see the Almonds because I love the way that he expresses that like Southern rock and
Hmm.
way he did it. And he has like a pain in his voice that he was able to convey live,
Yeah.
through the blues rock that I really appreciated. I every time I saw him, I could feel it. And I just thought he was really just amazing at channeling it and like, kind of living it because it feels like he's lived it.
Mm.
And if you read about it, he kinda did. So
Yeah.
so he's got that blue he actually, is a blues man. He always kind of self-deprecated that he wouldn't think he's as good as Lead Belly, not as good as Robert Johnson, not as good as the people that he actually looked up to, but he became just like them. He was able to
Mm.
channel the same kind of pain and feeling, and I'm like, "Well, you might not believe you're there, but you are."
Hmm.
And that's
Very
kinda
cool.
cool to have that when you have somebody that's not overly confident, but really good,
Yeah.
and it's like and then you understand that, and it's like, wow, there's something about that, there's a grace in that.
Oh, very cool. I one time saw Lyle Lovett in concert and was blown away at how exceptional his voice was live. It was it may not even be the best concert I've seen, but his voice live
Yeah,
is
he's a good
oh
singer.
my goodness.
Yeah, he has a lot of power. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
and somebody that's not here anymore that really impressed me was, like, Karen Carpenter.
Oh yeah.
I think Karen Carpenter has got, like, a voice that embodies melancholy and
Hmm.
expressiveness in a way that I've never heard another female singer be able to do that. there's something about those Carpenter songs, and I'm a child of the '70s. It's like, and I hear them, I just feel it. I feel something, even if it's a happy song. It's like she has something in her voice that nobody else has. It's like Karen Carpenter, and people know if they've listened to her. The other musicians. Oh, I know what you're talking about. The
Yeah.
fans. They kind of feel. They feel what I'm saying.
Well, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to some Carpenters now. It's been a long time since I have.
Yeah, she's not big on the scene anymore, but it's every once in a while people start picking up on it again and realizing how much of a loss. I mean, her voice is just amazing.
Yeah, very good. Well, if you haven't read it yet, I really enjoy reading biographies of musicians, pop stars, celebrities, even if I don't one way or the other
Like
care
'em,
for
like
them or am
yeah,
indifferent, because you get such a sense of what was going on in America at that time. And there's a reason they became popular. And that's why I enjoyed the Cher biography,
oh,
because
Cher's
you
amazing.
oh, you get such a sense of what was happening in America at that time. And her story, I didn't know much about her. Her story's pretty incredible. And yeah, she may not have ever been popular without Sonny, but she carried that. And
Well,
then
then she became like it ended up showing like how much pull she really had. I think
yeah.
at the beginning, Sonny probably thought he had all the pull,
Hmm.
but then really you start to see when she had her own show, it's like wow. I remember being a kid in the '70s, like and seeing her show. It's like she was it. you know, she was
Yeah.
the star. It's like you're like, oh, this star like with no last name is like Cher. She's like, you got that. That's it.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's amazing. Because I mean, growing up is like, wow, like how did like she just had this presence, and you get that, you get that star quality. Like, boom, she's there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy to forget now how big a deal Cher was at one time, and some of these other people, how big culturally they were, not just music wise, but culturally they had an impact.
Yeah, isn't that amazing impact that these time periods? Back then you didn't have as many distractions. You had four channels. You didn't have
Hmm.
cable TV, you didn't have satellite radio. So when the share was on, that was a big deal, and there wasn't a lot of other places to go
Yeah.
to be distracted. So when people had they were out there in that world, they were pretty big, and they were drawing everybody's attention. They weren't as many distractions that we have today.
Yeah, yeah. It was fascinating to learn how Sonny and Cher transformed from a musical act that had kind of fallen out of favor to like this comedy
Variety show.
routine.
Yeah,
Yeah, that people loved. And it's because you just you it did and this circles back to what we were saying before. You just never know. You have to try things. And for Sonny and Cher, it came where they were having a bad show and she started telling jokes, kind of making fun of Sonny, and people laughed. And so she did it again and people laughed. And
in
it
theater
it
becomes
yeah.
like you start realizing that you have some acting chops, that you actually could move into like a vaudeville theater, TV mode versus being a pop star. When realizing that the pop star thing was reaching a zenith, and to evolve, you were going to have to go to TV,
Yeah.
and then that's not every person realizes that's the direction they should go. They might keep on going, trying to fit the square peg in a round hole when it's not going to work.
Yeah, that's right. And you only get there by doing things, showing up, keep trying, keep asking. Don't say no for other people. Keep showing up, and things happen. You may not the whatever the big thing's going to be for you. You may not have even had any idea of it yet, but show up, keep trying, try new things, keep talking. It'll happen.
Yeah, I think that's a cool place to end today. But yeah, I think that is exactly right. Don't fail on yourself. Like be able to realize that just because you don't, you know, kick it this day, that you can like kick it the next day, or you could try this variation of something, And just because it's not known, just because you're not comfortable, that sometimes you have to be comfortable with a little discomfort to evolve. And
Yeah.
I think that's where the people who push themselves is like, hey, I'm not an actor. It's like, but then you become an actor. Now I'm not a comedian. Then you become a comedian. He's like, yeah, I'm not a TEDx speaker, but now I am. It's like, how did that happen? Well, I actually got on a stage and I started it. So it's like,
There you go.
you gotta get there.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I've never talked about Cher on a podcast before. I never imagined I would talk about Cher on a podcast, yet here we are.
We go where we go. That's the kind of winging it, like free form jazz kind of feel. But thank you.
That's
And at
right.
jodymaberry.com, if people click on that, what would they find there?
Well, that's my home for anything. You'll if you want to learn about podcasting, there's a good place to do it there. All the shows that I host are right there on the podcast tab. You'll find anything from Creating Disney Magic, Jody Maberry Show, Park Leader Show. I do a daily podcast for my son. He's a college student, so it's a nice inspiration for students. It's all right there on jodymaberry.com.
I want to thank you for being a guest on the Family Like the Ghost podcast. We've been live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and we'll be found on all the podcast platforms where you can listen to or watch a podcast by tomorrow. We'll give a landing page to you guys. You can choose whatever platform you want. And I want to thank you for being on the Family Like the Ghost podcast. Have a great night.